The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is Emma Jones from Enterprise Nation. Welcome to the VATMOS webinar we have with our wonderful accountant, Emily Coltman. Lots of you will be aware, and thank you for joining us today, that VATMOS comes into effect from the 1st of January. Enterprise Nation has been campaigning strongly on this in terms of introducing HMRC to some affected businesses, and now we're very focused on making sure small businesses have the information they need to comply, whilst we also compile data on the impact of small businesses of VATMOS, so we can hopefully call for change at an EU level if the impact is injurious to small businesses. So we are delighted today because we want to make sure you've got all the information possible. We're delighted to have Emily Coltman, who is a fantastic accountant and one of the best accountants, I think, for putting technical terms in English speak. Em is an author of accounting books, including one on VAT, which she beautifully called Very Awkward Tax. So there is no one better placed to talk us through VATMOS. So the format, ladies and gentlemen, of today's webinar is Em will talk for about 10 minutes with a presentation around explaining what VATMOS is, how you can register, etc. Whilst Em is talking, please feel free to pose your questions in the GoToWebinar admin bar, and what we'll do is once Em has presented her slides, we will pick up those questions and happily answer any questions that you've got. So at this point, Emily Coltman, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Emma. So, hello and good afternoon. I am, as Emma said, Emily Coltman. I'm Chief Accountant to Free Agent, and I am here at Emma's kind invitation to explain a little bit about VATMOS. So, next slide. Thanks, Lorna. Thank you. So, just before I start, I'd like to make it clear I do still believe strongly that the new rules will place an additional admin burden on very small businesses. I, like Emma, will continue to campaign for those rules to be changed, but until they are, I want to do my level best to help small business owners comply as far as possible with the new regulations for VAT invoicing, VAT registration, and so forth. If you're concerned about the data collection and protection elements of these new rules, I do recommend you have a chat with a friendly lawyer. Either Suzanne Dibble or Joe Tall of Off to See My Lawyer should be able to help you there. Suzanne in particular has already written some excellent content about how the rules are going to change. Next slide, thanks. So what are the incoming changes? Well, briefly, at the moment, a business that's registered for VAT in the UK and selling services to consumers, not businesses, consumers, in the wider EU, would charge them VAT at the rate applicable where the supplier is based, in other words, UK VAT. The EU has decided that it's fairer and will help reduce tax avoidance by large businesses to have businesses charge instead the VAT rate where the customer is based. That change comes into effect on the 1st of January 2015. Next slide, thanks. So that means that, for example, if you're selling to French consumers, you have to charge French VAT. To German consumers, you charge German VAT, and so on. The rules are not changing for all services, only those that are supplied digitally or electronically with no or little human intervention in the selling process. So, for example, if you have a website that sells ebooks for automatic download by the customer, you will get caught by the new rules. Next slide, thanks. If you're in business in the UK, you don't have to register and start charging UK VAT until your business's sales go over 81,000 a year. But that is a very high threshold compared with the rest of the EU. And because these changes are to EU rules, not UK rules, there is at the moment no lower limit or de minimis threshold for when you have to start charging local VAT to your EU customers if you're selling digital services with little or no human intervention. So that means if you're selling a few ebooks, a few knitting patterns every year, you are still going to have to charge local VAT in the EU, even if you are not charging VAT in the UK, even if you do not pay income tax in the UK, you're still going to get caught. Next slide, thanks. So you might have heard the term VATMOS used. That's actually short for Mini One-Stop Shop. It's a way to try and mitigate the extra burden of the new rules to some extent. If you do find that you have to start charging local VAT, then at least if you register for the MOS, you can report all your EU VAT to the UK's HMRC, to the UK's taxman, instead of having to register for VAT in up to 27 different countries and file VAT returns there. If you use the MOS, at least you only have to file 2 sets of VAT returns per quarter, which admittedly is still a high admin burden for micro businesses, but that's got to be better than 27. Unfortunately, nobody yet knows what a MOS VAT return will look like because the first one can't be filed until April 2015. A MOS VAT return will cover the quarter, the first MOS VAT return, cover the quarter which runs from the 1st of January 2015 to the 31st of March 2015. Next slide, thanks. So you cannot register with HMRC to use the MOS unless you're registered in the UK. But if you are a small business with sales under the UK VAT threshold, you can register for UK VAT only in the context of your cross-border sales so that you can use MOS. That is good news because otherwise you would have had to register in 27 other countries and file a whole load of international returns. You don't actually have to register for VAT MOS until you make your first EU sale on or after the 1st of January 2015. And you'd register for MOS through the HMRC website. So if you type in hmrc.gov.uk, that will take you to the revenue website. Search for VAT MOS, you'll find it. Next slide, thanks. Once you've registered for UK VAT and you're using MOS, you will have to file a UK VAT return, which is what you can see here, as well as your MOS return. The UK VAT return will show no slides made. So box 1 of this return, for a business that's operating MOS and not otherwise registered, that will actually say 0. That is because you're not going to charge VAT on your UK sales. But you are allowed to claim back on your UK VAT return the cost of any VAT you've incurred making your cross-border sales. For example, if you were to pay a web designer to expand the capabilities of your e-commerce site to allow you to comply with the new data collection requirements. Next slide, thanks. So when you're making cross-border sales, even if you're reporting the VAT on one return using MOS, you do still have to issue VAT invoices to your customers which comply with the requirements of the country where they're based, or even the country where the customer received the service. HMRC do outline the requirements for checking where the customer's based because there are data collection rules in play here. If you're not sure what these are, we have actually put together a list of useful links that we can share at the end of the webinar. Next slide, thanks. So here are some tips for what you should do to comply as far as you can with the requirements for issuing VAT invoices. Once you've identified the country where the invoice is to be issued, check the VAT rates that are in operation for that country. Bear in mind that not only do different countries have different standard VAT rates, like the UK's 20%, but that they also have different reduced rates which apply to different goods and services. The UK's reduced rate of 5% applies broadly to quasi-essentials like domestic gas and electricity, but unfortunately each country in the EU sets their own rules for what's standard and what's reduced. If you're selling e-books, for example, in France, those are subject to the reduced rate of 5.5%, whereas in Hungary, they're subject to the top rate of 27%, while Denmark has no reduced rates at all and charges 25% VAT. If you're not sure what rates operate in this country you're selling to, then we'll share a link to a handy list at the end of this webinar. One possible approach that's been discussed just recently on Twitter is to set your price to include the highest potential level of VAT that you might have to charge, and then if you sell to a customer in a country where the rate's lower, then you've made a bit of extra profit. But that could, of course, potentially lose you customers, because a French customer who's used to paying 5.5% VAT on ebooks might not want to pay for an ebook that's got 27% VAT included in the price. Next, thanks. You do also need to make sure you know what information to include on your VAT invoices, as you may have to revise your website to collect that at the point of sale. So, for example, if you find yourself selling to a customer in Bulgaria, you'll need to ask them for their tax identification number if they're not registered for VAT, and put that on your invoice. Some countries ask for the total amount before VAT to be shown as one figure. Others expect that total to be broken down by VAT rate if you're selling some items at one VAT rate and some at another. And in some countries, if you're invoicing in a different currency, you must also show the amount of VAT you're charging in the local currency. Some countries do also specify how quickly after the sale you must issue a VAT invoice. Some give you a few days, some it's up to 6 months, some say straight away. We'll share a guide to the different invoicing requirements for the different countries at the end of this webinar. Next slide, thanks. Well, hopefully I've not confused you completely on that. So I've tried to cover some of the key points around VAT invoicing for MOS. As I say, I do think the rules are still very unwieldy. They do need adapting for small businesses, but what I'm trying to do is to help you comply as far as possible, assuming we can't get change through before the beginning of January. So thank you very much. Has anybody got some questions for me?
Well, thank you very much, Em. That was fantastic. And as per ever, you do outline the things that people need to know in a way that I think most small businesses can understand, which is just lovely to put it in terms that we can gather and kind of use. Em, just before we go into questions, quick question from me and a kind of a comment actually is earlier this morning, Enterprise Nation hosted a call between HM Revenue and Customs and marketplaces and platforms. So businesses, of course, can trade on Amazon. I know there's a big take of profits that come from there, but some of the marketplaces and platforms would be able to take care of the VAT on behalf of the merchant, but of course there's a number of them that are not marketplaces. But do you have any views in terms of would it be easier for a small business to sell via marketplace and therefore essentially outsource the duty, or you know, just take on the admin responsibility themselves?
That honestly depends on how much time the business owner's got to spare, Emma. I think obviously for a small business owner every penny counts, so if they can manage to do the admin themselves without going through the marketplace, then they'll have more money to play with, but equally it's going to cost them more time to issue the VAT invoices, check the VAT rates, check where the customer is, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a case for both approaches.
Understood, and thank you for that. So just to go into some of the questions that we've got here, a question from Pat Reynolds. Can you say something about EU VAT on physical goods?
Physical goods, Pat, are not being affected by these changes at this stage. There are rumours that these rules will be extended to physical goods in perhaps the next 2 years, but at this stage the change only applies to sales of services and not to sales of all services either. So if you sell goods, then for now you don't have to change your processes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Em. A question from Verpi Oinonen. Great name. I don't know if I pronounced that right, Verpi. Verpi asks, can I avoid VATMOS if my customers are mainly businesses in the EU? If so, is it enough that I tell people in a personal capacity that are based in the EU not to buy anything? So I guess the first question is, can I avoid VATMOS if my customers are businesses in the EU?
If your customers are businesses, not consumers, then actually you're lucky, you don't have to change what you're doing now. It's only if you are selling digital services to consumers, not to businesses. There is actually conflicting guidance from HMRC around what constitutes a business and what doesn't. In some parts of the guidance, it actually says a business is a private individual or a charity, or I think something like an organisation like a sports club doesn't necessarily qualify as a business. In other parts of the guidance not related to this issue, they say you must have a VAT number from a business. If you must have a VAT number or other evidence that who you're selling to is a business. But if you are selling to businesses, the changes don't affect you. Sorry, Emma, what was the second part of the question?
Yeah, well, no, I think that answers it. So that's great to get clarity on that if you're selling to businesses in the EU, you are not affected by VATMOS. It is only if you're selling to consumers.
That is right. The second part of the question, I think, was around, it wasn't around data collection. I'm sorry, it slipped out of my mind again. There was a second part of the question.
We'll go on to data collection actually in a moment. But yeah, the second question from Verpi, is it enough that I tell people in a personal capacity that are based in the EU not to buy anything?
Well, from that point of view, you could actually fall foul of discrimination laws, is my understanding. If you restrict your sales only to people in certain countries, then theoretically, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I am an accountant, so I'm not 100% certain, but I have read that you could actually fall foul of anti-discrimination laws if you prevent people in the EU from buying from you.
Fine, okay, but Verpi, hopefully that helps you, because if you're selling to businesses, you're not liable anyway. Okay, a question from Simon. If I was to deliver a charged consultancy via Skype to a client, and they could be an individual or a small business, would I need to register for MOS?
Simon, I think that what you are doing is providing a service that does not have little or no human intervention, because you are providing that service yourself in real time through Skype. I believe that the guidance differentiates between live webinars and recorded webinars in that context. So, for example, this webinar, because we're doing it live, that does involve human intervention. Emma and I are sitting here talking now. We're humans, so that does involve human intervention, so that service isn't caught. Whereas if I were to record a video about VATMOS and put that on a website, and people bought it from me and I didn't do anything else through except to put it on my website, that's caught. So Simon, in terms of your consultancy, my understanding is you're okay.
Excellent. So far, actually, we're saying to most people that you don't have to register for VATMOS, which is good news. And actually, just as a response to that, you may have seen a post earlier this week on Enterprise Nation where we profiled a business owner called Simon Dunnant, who runs a company called New Rise Digital, and he is working around VATMOS by introducing a live element to the services that he offers. And admittedly, in lots of the comments, people were saying this is not a long-term solution, but of course, as people like Emily Coltman and Enterprise Nation lobby for change, hopefully we can get change so that that doesn't have to be a long-term impact. So introducing some live and human elements to your services could be a way around not having to register for VATMOS.
Yeah.
Okay, a question, well actually I think you've already answered this one, Em. So a question from Kerry Wielden, can I choose to not sell to other EU countries? And I think you've just addressed that in the discrimination, is that right?
I have, yes, I have. As I say, there is more guidance available from lawyers, from people who actually know more about that than I do. But as I say, I am an accountant, not a lawyer, so I'm probably not best placed to advise on that.
And I guess the difficult thing around this is if you have a website, you will have people buying from everywhere, so you can't really kind of put a sign up saying don't buy if you're from the EU. So I guess that's the difficulty over that.
Exactly, yes, exactly. If you
actually,
yeah,
sorry, go on.
Okay. As we've discussed before, Emma, you and I, if you sell online, by definition your business is global, and if you cut out sales from any one country or another, then you could potentially fall foul of anti-discrimination laws, is my understanding.
And just to confirm on that, we will get confirmation on that because quite a few of you have got the same question. Angie Taffs asks, can I stipulate to purchasers that they can only purchase if based in the UK? Genevieve is saying, can I block EU customers? So if everybody's happy, we will get confirmation on this from a lawyer. Em mentioned two fantastic lawyers at the beginning, Joe Tall, who's brilliant from Off to See My Lawyer. We will get confirmation today on what the implications are if you do try and block people from the EU buying your products. So we can report back on that. And so a question from ID. ID, I'm not quite sure who you are, but the question is, how can we get people to confirm they are a business? So, of course, VATMOS is only applicable if you sell to consumers. Yes. Is there a way of encouraging people to say, I am a business, and therefore the UK business doesn't have to register for VATMOS?
What you can do is ask at the point of sale, you might have actually seen this on other websites, ask them at the point of sale for their VAT registration number. If they're a business that's registered for VAT in, say, France, then ask them for their French VAT registration number. There is a website called VIES, which lets you check to see whether VAT registration numbers you've received are valid in that country. Doesn't tell you whether it actually is the customer's VAT number, but it tells you whether they've given you a valid VAT number. If you've got a valid VAT number, then that is cast iron proof that that person is a business. Otherwise, there is other evidence you can collect. For example, you can get a letter written on the business's letterheaded paper. You might actually have to get them to email that to you. There is, if you look at their business website, basically you need to collect enough evidence to satisfy yourself and to satisfy a visiting HMRC inspector that you are selling to businesses. And HMRC do also say that they will accept that certain services would be sold only to businesses. So, for example, if you make something like an e-commerce website, then I would be very surprised if HMRC did not accept that that would only be sold to businesses, because an individual would be unlikely to buy an e-commerce website of their own. Someone who wanted to sell a few small goods would probably go through eBay or something like that. That is my opinion.
Excellent, thank you for that, ID just comes back on this. What if the person is not VAT registered, if they are a small business?
If they're not VAT registered, try and find other evidence if you can that they are in business. If you are selling services, try and, as I say, try and get them to send you a letter on their letterhead. Look to see if they've got a website of their own. Look to see if on a website like I was going to say due dil, but of course that's only for limited companies. But you can have limited companies that don't have VAT on. So look for them on, say, a register of companies. Look for, as I say, have a look at their website to see if it is a business site. Basically, collect enough evidence to satisfy yourself and to argue with a visiting HMRC inspector that yes, that person is a bona fide business.
Excellent. And ID has replied, great, really helpful, thanks. Hopefully there will be a recording of this. So maybe just for me to say, ID, there will be a recording. So as soon as we finish the webinar, we will upload this for anyone who couldn't log in today to make sure that everybody gets the benefit of Em's advice. Just a quick thing that I wanted to mention about data, that when VATMOS comes into effect, there are two provisions that the small business owner should collect data on. One is to collect data when you sell to the customer on their address or telephone number. That has to then tally with information you get from your payment processor. And what we have just had this morning is confirmation from PayPal that they will be able to provide a 2-digit country code to every PayPal merchant so you can see where your customer is coming from. So do have a look on enterprisenation.com, because that's hot off the press this morning that we've got confirmation from PayPal that they can help with that data provision.
That's really good news.
That is good news. A quick question in, Simon Hartup. You mentioned reference to websites you mentioned in the webinar. Are you happy for us to share links to those websites that you mentioned?
The websites I mentioned, such as HMRC's brief about the MOS and guidance around where the EU VAT rates by country are, yes, of course, I've forwarded those across to Lorna, Emma, so I'm happy for those to be circulated.
Excellent. Okay, lovely. So we will make sure that we share that with you. A question, Dan Martin. Hello, Dan Martin. A comment from Dan. This goes back to actually blocking EU sales, and Dan's questioning whether marketplaces can allow you to block EU sales. Are they breaking the law? So we will check on that point, Dan, in terms of how it comes to as to whether you can block EU sales that come through. In fact, lots of these questions are about literally, can you refuse to sell to EU customers? So it does seem that if we can get some clarity on the legal position of that. A quick question in, is there any difference to what you're covering if you are based in Ireland?
Ireland, that's a very good question. I would imagine the same rules will apply because the rules are changing across the EU. The Irish VAT MOS is going to be different from the UK's. It'll be a different registration, a different return to fill in, and what the requirements are for small businesses under the Irish VAT threshold, I honestly couldn't tell you, but I would suspect that the rules will change in Ireland too, that for example, if you're based in Ireland and you sell to the UK, you're going to have to charge 20% to your customers if you're selling digital services with no human intervention. You're going to have to charge 20%, which is the UK rate, rather than the Irish rate, which I think is 21%.
Okay, fantastic. Another question in, can I manually email a purchased ebook and avoid this problem?
Oh, that is a very good question. I have actually seen a discussion in Accounting Web today. Apparently, I think Andrew Webb from HMRC said that would actually still count as a digital service with little or no human intervention. That is still open for discussion, so I'm not sure if that would get you off the hook. I would probably try and look at providing a personal element to the service. If the manual email perhaps contained a few words of targeted advice for that particular customer, that might well get you off the hook.
Okay, that's interesting, Em. And again, we'll check on that actually, because I had thought if you manually email ebooks, etc., that does constitute human intervention, so you wouldn't be part of VATMOS. So we will also check up on that, because that seems to be not so good, that if you manually email, you still have to register for VATMOS. So we will also check on that one. Question, Noel Guilford, thank you for your question. What is the position for a business based outside the EU, say a US company selling to the EU?
I will honestly say I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Very honest, Em.
I don't know if the rules are going to change for businesses outside the EU selling into the EU, whether, for example, a US business would have to start charging EU VAT. The honest answer is I don't know.
Okay, all right. I do know we had, when we first started to raise VATMOS on Enterprise Nation, we had a business owner from Australia saying that she was disturbed by this. So I think it is impacting US companies that sell into the EU. But of course, I guess our big concern at Enterprise Nation, I know Emily feels the same, is how UK businesses are affected. Just a final question from me, and then we'll do a recap on the questions, is you are the Chief Accountant for Free Agent. It came up on our call this morning that actually companies such as Free Agent, Cashflow, Sage, Intuit, you also have lots of data on sales that are being made. I wonder if you might say anything in terms of, does Free Agent feel it's got a role to play in terms of sharing data with people who use your accounting service to help the small businesses comply with the data requirement?
That's a very interesting question. It's not something that we've actually discussed internally, so it's probably not a question I can answer at this stage.
Sure. But actually, if there was something there, and I'll be following up with you, kind of offline, I guess, it would just be interesting to get the feedback from the accounting platform. So we'll do that again later on today. But at this point, lovely comments. Angie Taffs says, this session has been the clearest explanation I've heard so far. ID says, have to say that Emily has provided the most understandable education about this tricky issue that I've heard to date, which is just fantastic to hear. So ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, a very brief recap in terms of Em's main points. It seems that you cannot block people from the EU buying your services, but we will get legal clarity on that, but it seems that you can't do any blocks. If you're selling physical goods, you're fine, because VATMOS only applies to services. If you're selling to businesses in the EU, you're fine, because VATMOS only applies to selling to consumers. The platforms that I mentioned who are on the call with us this morning will now be coming out to confirm the position that they are in. If they are a marketplace, they will take on the responsibility for your VAT payments. If they are not a marketplace, the admin requirement stays with you as a small business, and we hope to hear from them over the next week. And also just confirmation on the data point, that the data you have to provide being the phone number or address of your customer, to tally with what you get from your payment provider, that PayPal have come out this morning and confirmed that they will make that data available to every merchant on PayPal. So I hope that that has been useful. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, Emily Coltman, for sparing your time on what is a very time-sensitive issue. And I know you feel, just like Enterprise Nation, that this is an admin burden for small businesses. We want to see it change, but in the meantime, we have to make sure small businesses are ready for the 1st of January. So thank you to all who have logged in. As I say, we will take this broadcast, we'll make it available on the site within the next hour. So please encourage any other small business owners who are concerned about VATMOS to listen in at any time to their convenience. But in the meantime, Emily Coltman, we really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your clarity on this issue.
That's my pleasure, Emma. Thank you to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.